Thank you again. I know it's a hot day and I'm very flattered to see so many people here. Vishal, let's begin since we don't have much time. I'm just going to go straight into it. Education is, of course, an interesting topic when lots of people have opinions and ideas on it. But what drew you to the subject and why did you end up deciding to make this a book length project?
Thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for all of you for turning up today. So I was a teacher for a very long time. I was a teacher since the age of 18 or 19. And as my teaching career progressed, I started somehow, one could say inevitably or just by choice also, I started teaching very, very privileged, wealthy children. And where the idea of education was being taken for granted, and I started seeing that the benefits of education are very varied, while the idea of being educated remains the same. For example, where I come from in Chennai, uh, a common a common question that's often asked is, "Ninga படிச்சவங்களா?" You look educated and all of that. And I was like, what does this mean? Because the way the people I teach come from very different backgrounds than the people for whom education is supposed to have significant benefits, supposed to equalize. And I also started like I used to I read a lot of nonfiction, and I saw that there's very little critical work on engaging with people's aspirations, people's agency, people's desires with education. So I started tinkering with the idea of kind of putting people's stories front and center in education, because education as a project somehow is always top down. It is from, let's say, education policy, or from the way schools are run, or from the way tuition classes happen, or even education to the side of family. It all comes through comes, I wouldn't necessarily say through commands, but it comes a little top down. I was like, so why don't we invert it and see what are people's stories with education? And that's how the genesis of the idea began. And then it swirled in a whole host of different processes where it involved me being in places of conflict. It involved me witnessing some child marriages, drinking a good amount of toddy in Tamil Nadu, which is illegal. But surprisingly, well, I mean, obviously, you're not going to be able to ban alcohol. And what happens because of that? And slowly, the idea, like, it started emerging that different people have very different aspirations of education and what they understand as being educated. So the the idea started becoming more and more clear that we can't take this process of education for granted. Neither can we take the school for granted. Like the kind of schools that, let's say, you and I go to would be very different from the kind of school someone from an oppressed socioeconomic background would go to. But the idea is that the school is an equalizer. But I was like, well, that sounds intuitive, but clearly that's not. So the idea was to then explore a lot more of it, and and I suppose that's what's come out in the book. I hope.
Random factoid when you were talking about schools and teaching privileged kids. Do you have a sense of what the fees are across the whole spectrum of schools?
Yeah. That's a good question actually. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in my PhD as well. So. The private school system in India, taken all together, is the third largest school system in the world after China and India's public school system. Almost 55 to 60% of all kids in India go to private schools, and it's not a phenomenon that is unique just to India.
Wait. Say that again. 50 to 60% go
Of
to
all
private
children
schools.
of all children in India go to private schools, and the fees for these schools range from 5,000 rupees to 30 lakh rupees
A year.
a year. Right? So the schools that are that charge 5,000 rupees, they kind of categorize as low income private schools, and you see these dime a dozen, especially across North India. And then you have your international schools, which have like various different international curriculums, like the IGCSE, the Cambridge curriculum, the International Baccalaureate for diplomats, like an American school system, O levels, A levels, all of that go on for like go to upwards of 20 to 30 lakhs. In fact, in Chennai, the fastest growing private school market is actually of international schools that is charging a minimum of 3 to 4 lakhs a year. And so if you take the life cycle of a child going through school, of a learner going through school, 12 years, anywhere between 3 to 30 lakhs, you do the math. And this is obviously way behind the affordability of, forget the top 1%, of the top 0.1%. So it's becoming clear that school education is not just an equalizer, but a significant engine for inequality, which is taken for granted a lot. And how and why is it being taken for granted is something I have been trying to explore as well. And one of the major, at least my understandings of it, I don't mean to theorize or generalize, but my major understanding of it is that learners' needs and learners' aspirations are not taken seriously because education, when looked at within the lens of the nation state, is ultimately a nation building project. We are looking to build compliant, pliant citizens who would be able to contribute to a particular class. And that's how school education has been imagined in India and across the developing world from the time these post-colonial countries have gained independence. And it's important to understand how and where school systems and education systems have been designed from, because they clearly are a citizen building, compliance driven technology that is used to kind of, I wouldn't completely say control, but like it's used for various different purposes, but one of it is to create pliant compliant citizens.
We'll come back to this whole point on what education seeks to achieve. But I also had a question about the title of your book, which is The Smart and the Dumb, which is, I thought, an interesting title, but also I think you mean it with a degree of irony. And I also noticed that in your book at the start, you mentioned that your original title was What's the Point? And then all your editors told you that that's very defeatist and very pessimistic, and you shouldn't have a title like that. Explain this title of The Smart and the Dumb. What are you trying to communicate?
I mean, I've got the critique that the smart and the dumb is defeatist as well. Like you said, the original title of the book that I wanted it to be was "What's the Point?" And over the course of 2 years, multiple publishers continuously kept rejecting the book, primarily saying that it's anti-Ambedkarite, saying that Ambedkarite, which I took a little, I was not okay with that criticism because I think like my book has a rather strong critique of caste and systems embedded in it. But the idea was like, the question of what's the point was like, what is the point of education? Are we even thinking about it? Everybody's like, has families, they raise their families, they're like, okay, I'll put my kid to school. What's the point of it? What are you trying to achieve? What is the strategy behind sending a child to school? Or what is the strategy behind education? Well, clearly, like that seemed to be rather defeatist, and so while in the deep search of a title, I suppose like a lot of us writers are, one thing started emerging clearly from my fieldwork. The fieldwork for the book was over 4 years. That education does achieve a lot of phenomenal things. It is perhaps the greatest technology we have to kind of imagine an egalitarian society and for economic mobility. I'm not going to social mobility yet, but for economic mobility to a large extent. But ultimately, it does do one thing. If it can, it solves a lot of problems. It bridges a lot of differences. It bridges a lot of gaps. But it creates a new class of people, the smart and the dumb. The smart people who have been able to corner the benefits of education. The smart people who have been able to corner the benefits of education, particularly through neoliberal means, and quote unquote the dumb who have unfairly been denied access to quality education and therefore are categorized as dumb, whose fate is up to them because they're like, well, you had the opportunity to go to school, you didn't make the best use of it. So it's kind of a take on, it's questioning the idea of meritocracy as well, where which is a raging debate in India and now, of course, across the world as well. Whether like, should you get just rewards for your talents? Yes, but do we have just access to equality of opportunity? And even if you do have access, the interesting thing is in India, again, another factoid, India achieved 100% gross enrollment ratio in primary education a long time back, more than a decade ago. That is basically now every child in India goes to school. So it's one of the most common experiences Indians have as citizens. But the difference in quality is so stark, this is out there in so many reports, the National Achievement Surveys, the Annual Survey of Education report by Pratham and all of that. Like 60 to 70% of all kids in India in class 5, basically in primary school, at the top of primary school, can't read a single line in English, a single line in their mother tongue, or perform 2-digit arithmetic. 60 to 70% of all kids, and this has only been declining over the last 5 to 10 years, exacerbated by the pandemic. So where is this question of meritocracy coming, and what is the school or what is education systems doing? The idea was that, like, the idea of the title is that yes, you will be able to achieve all of this by going to school, but as a society, we need to somehow figure out how to reconcile with this very difficult notion that a bunch of us who are here literate in English, who are well versed with the ways of the world and are able to corner benefits of neoliberal systems, and we are the smart people and we have all the legitimacy and the right to our benefits and rewards, and the rest of them deserve their fate. And that is perhaps at the heart of a lot of populist, hardcore right-wing politics that's coming up as well.
So before we go into some of the stories in the book, since you mentioned this, I also wanted to ask, given this landscape and given how complicated it is, for policymakers at a national level, it's obviously a challenge to craft any kind of single centralized policy to cater to this. How do you, I mean, is there a fix to that? How do you even legislate and make policy for a situation like this?
Thanks for that. So I studied policy and I worked with the Department of School Education at a policy level. It's very clear. Actually, interesting you asked that, because recently a review of my book came out. Was rather disparaging, saying that, well, you're showing us all of these problems, you're not suggesting any solution. In another talk I did in Chennai, a granddaughter of a former chief minister, she was like, so what are you saying? You think we should just throw out education systems or just schools? You're just continuously complaining and saying these are problems. The idea is that any policy that comes up is necessarily, in some sense, authoritarian when it comes to education. Because education, and it's well established also, this is not me saying, education is perhaps the most political act of it all, primarily because of two questions. The question of what to teach and how to teach are the most inherent questions in education. And the answers to these two questions are decided by people in power. And that's what policy also does. So a unilateral policy, like the national education policy, clearly serves to achieve particular purposes, particular benefits for a group of people who have been ordained to believe that they deserve it. So one policy, a one-size-fits-all for education, is a very, very difficult project, primarily because it's an authoritarian project. Primarily because it is going to tell a group of people, this is how you should be, this is how your body should be, this is how your minds should be. Now, there's a off-quoted statement that Kerala is the most literate state in the country. Now, the important question is, what does it mean to be literate? What does literacy mean? Because at the same time, and the popular Freirean framework, at the same point, literacy can be a tool for liberation, for resistance, for struggle, but also a way to control epistemically people's thought processes, frameworks, concepts, ways of being as well. So when we are saying we should, Kerala is very literate, or like literacy is very important, we should achieve 100% literacy, it's important to ask the political question of what does it mean to be literate? And who benefits from this fact of 100% literacy or 50% literacy as well?
What's your answer to that question?
Like I said, it's very authoritarian to bring out one solution. It doesn't work that way. So education works a lot better ground up rather than bottom up, rather than top down. And for any one person to suggest it, it kind of it's just a circular loop. We're going to be going in that same loop again and again. Let's say I traveled a bit, I wrote this book, I have a decent understanding of education in India, so I'm like, do these 2-3 solutions. Well, that is coming from my social position or from my socio-economic background, being upper caste, being cisgendered man, being upper class, having been Western educated, well-spoken in English as my first language. All of these factors will contribute to the way I articulate a solution. So if any solution, and I didn't want to write this in the book, and perhaps I should have now that you mention it as well, is that how is it that, like I said, almost all of us have been to school. That's one assumption I can make of all of us in this crowd, irrespective of where we are from. But schools education do not come up in electoral politics at all. It is the one common experience we all have as citizens. No society has been able to devise a technology that is capable of bringing so many people together in one physical location for 7 to 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week for 12 to 15 years. Religious institutions can try, but absolutely not. No other, but this is completely taken for granted. How is it not there in electoral politics? Why is it that not a single political party is contesting on the plank of quality education? A bunch of parties like the AAP have contested on access to education, but like I've written this before also, access to education is 10% of the problem. The, the disparity in quality is so stark that like it's sometimes like some scholars have also argued that for this kind of education it's better to not go to school at all, and that's why you see dropouts. You see that like until the age of 10 you have 100% gross enrollment ratio. By the time you go to 14 it's like a complete dip.
Is it also gendered, like girls and boys? Or?
Interestingly, yes and no. The facts are not on the top of my head, but that trend is reversing a little bit as well. Girls used to drop out a lot earlier, but now it's also like kind of intuitive common sense that if the benefits of education are not being realized sooner or later, it's much better for you to go work. And that's the reason also why the minimum working age in India is 14. Whereas in a bunch, I mean, it's like that in a bunch of other countries also. But like they're like, well, if it's not working for you, just go do something else. And that's what's happening.
That's a good segue into the first person you cover in the book. Because it's not really about the quality of the education, it's not really about what you're really learning, but it's about education as a means to free yourself of an existing social structure. There's this girl from a nomadic tribe called Nisha, who ordinarily would have been married off in a child marriage ceremony, etc., when she was a kid, and I think she was. And she then sort of, in quotes, divorces this person at the age of 14 in order to continue her education. So I suppose in a situation like that, it's the social question that emerges, which is that whatever the quality of the education, it may be atrocious, it may be horrible, she may be in a government school where she doesn't even have toilets, yet the act of going to school empowers her when it comes to escaping a regressive social structure. So there's also a bizarre contradiction there, right?
It's a serious contradiction and it's a serious dilemma because in that chapter, well, one part of the story is of a young woman called Nisha who was married at the age of 9 to a boy slightly older to her, 12 or 13. And then basically how it works in particular parts of Rajasthan where I was doing my fieldwork in this village called Govardhanpura near Ajmer, is that after the girl hits puberty, or now it's changing a little bit after the girl finishes a particular standard of education, 8 class, 8 class 10, she will go off to her sasural, to her in-laws place. And this girl was like, absolutely not. I want to study. I will not go to my in-laws. I'm not going to condemn myself to this life. And she got divorced at the age of 14. Less than 3 kilometers away is a night school.
By the way, we should say this. These are not formal marriages and divorces. This is a social custom.
Yeah. Well, they are formal marriages to the extent that it happens outside the law, but within the ambit of police and other social systems that govern that society over there. And 3 kilometers away from where Nisha was are these night schools run by an NGO. Basically, because in the day, a bunch of people have to go tend to the farm or tend to their goats or whatever profession that they're doing. But mostly goat herding was a profession over there. Well, you can't herd goats easily at night. So basically they started these night schools. And this grandmother who I interviewed was like, no matter what, I will not let my daughter go to school because this is a 14-year-old girl, because she has to get married to this boy that this grandmother has looked for her, who's 16 years old and is a truck driver. I don't know how that's even possible to be 16-year-old and have a license to be a truck driver. She's like, if because of the walk from their house to the night school is 1.5 kilometers and it's at night, they're like, ladki ki ijjat kya hogi? What is to happen of my girl's honor if she is to be walking at night? So she dropped out of school. So it's interesting for the sake of marriage. And this girl was happy that she's getting married to this apparently handsome guy also. So this contradiction is there in that education can be used as a tool to get out of a regressive social custom like child marriage, but at the same time causes when you don't look at the lives of people empathetically, compassionately, and see what are a bunch of other social factors that are involved in decision making of education. This is what's going to happen. It's just 3 kilometers away. You're going to have these complete contradictory stories. Both these girls are at the same age. And I mean, of course, this is one story which is meant to bring about another point. There are, of course, things are changing to some extent, but that doesn't mean child marriage is not happening. Child marriages are, to some extent, increasing in different parts of the country, including in supposedly progressive places like Tamil Nadu and Kerala as well.
It's interesting because, of course, quality of education matters. You want people to come out of school as well rounded individuals and personalities. But also, when you're tinkering with or dismantling or attempting to dismantle an existing system, that even that existing limited poor system can have a positive role when it comes to these social things. But I'll also ask you about your chapter on Manipur, which I found very interesting because it's about a conflict zone. There's an insurgency going on. And it's interesting that on the one hand, you make the case that a centralized education system in school is also a way for the government at the center to build loyalty and stakeholders in Manipur society who are otherwise a bit resistant to this idea. So school becomes a way to also engineer a social attitude that is less insurgency, more pro-government of India, that kind of a thing. But it's also interesting that going to school allows people to escape their everyday turmoil. Like it's a way of shutting out what's happening in the everyday world around them, in their culture, in their societies, and studying some almost abstracted, I don't know, Mughal history, this, that. It's a way of switching off from the troubles that you face every day. Tell us a little bit about this whole conflict zone situation.
Well, so it's important to contextualize that when I went to Manipur in late 2021, it was the longest peacetime that Manipur had seen in a very, very long time.
Now that's changed.
Now that's completely changed, right? So it's important to contextualize over there. So when I went to, this is again, you're in a conflict zone, when you're in a conflict zone in peacetime is very different from when you're in a conflict zone at conflict time. There was a sense of hope. There was a palpable sense uh, of hope and desire. They're like, okay, we have had a very, very difficult past. Manipur has a longest insurgency in India, predates independence, because they never wanted to be part of the Indian Union. It was forcibly, the state of Manipur, or whatever we understand of it today, was forcibly acceded into India. And then again, Manipur is one of that entire region is one of the most anthropologically diverse regions, as diverse as Amazon, considering the number of tribes and their customs and all of that's over there. Uh, so the schooling that happens in the valley in Manipur is very different from the schooling that happens in the hill, because in the valley you have the Meiteis who are who identified themselves as Brahmins, but are now asking for scheduled tribe status, which is also kind of like a bit of where this current conflict in Manipur is coming from. And all the hills consist of various tribes who have made the hills their home for centuries and millennia. Very, very different customs and traditions, and of course, being geographically very distant from the valley and from the hills. But the insurgency has taken such vast turns, it's so complex, that to be able to pin it down to particular points is not going to work. And this is again the folly of education again, because the ploy of school education was that we will have this one curriculum, the Manipur State Board curriculum or the CBSE curriculum or the ICSE curriculum or whatever curriculum that's going on in these schools. We will put this curriculum for the Meitei Brahmins. We'll put this curriculum for the Naga tribes who are perhaps accessing education for the first time, and for the Kukis in the south who do not like the Nagas or who do not like the Meiteis, and the history that's taught, relevant to your work as well, the history that's taught, the social science that's taught, the way math is taught, for example, the way word problems are taught, is an inherently political act.
Give us an example.
So for example, let's say the fruit that grows in Manipur, in the valley, in Imphal, is very different from the fruit, like from fruits that grow in the hills. But they'll be like, let's say I have 2 apples and 3 oranges, how many fruits I have? They'll say I have 2 of this fruit and 3 of this fruit, which will mostly be from the valley, right? So, and again, the history that's taught in these textbooks is completely of North Indian history, erasing centuries and centuries of tribal histories, of their ways of life, of the conflict, all of that's erased. So when you standardize all of this, A, there's a disillusionment, and B, there's confusion. And finally, there is the idea that we will be able to achieve unity by forgetting a whole host of things that have happened, turns on its head when the school becomes a site for identity politics. So I was in this district called in this town called Kamjong, which is one of the easternmost districts in India. It shares a large land border with Myanmar. There, three tribes coexist, or supposedly coexist. It was the site of an almost genocide a few years ago. There was interesting, well, for once there was mainstream media coverage on it where an entire village was burned down. The next day, these kids had to go back to the same school. Now imagine that. Your, the Kukis and the Nagas share this, they're in the same village, which is first up not a part of their tradition. So the Nagas burn the Kukis' villages, and then there's only one government school. And so the kids of these villages have to go to the same school the next day, the very next day. And after the burning down of an entire village. So the school is not necessarily just a site for peace, which is a rather myopic idea of it. The school becomes a site for conflict. And inversely, conflict becomes a site for education. Because there they learn that this kid's, my classmate's dad burnt my friend's house. That's what they learn. And their notions of hatred, their notions of sectarianism, their notions of however they want to identify and have their politics later get cemented over here. So clearly, like, this one size fits all is not working. And schools become a site for conflict. And perhaps one of the most important sites for conflict.
It's very interesting because thinking of it from the point of view of a government would use a word like mainstreaming. We have to mainstream people into the rest of the country, etc. And therefore, this is exactly strategically done. Whereas you're saying that local identities, the local history, all of that obviously matters as well. Just 1 second. ഈ സമയത്തിന്റെ കുന്തം വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. So the next.
Understood that.
Sorry. Forget mainstreaming. Since we're running out of time, I think we've got about 30 minutes left. We leave the conflict zone there and now move back to your home state of Tamil Nadu. Again, an absolutely fascinating chapter on people who produce toddy, or are now illegal. It's illegal, so they're not supposed to, but they still do it. And these Palmyra tree climbers and their culture and their access to education. And there's this one quote you have where somebody says, "Why is studying engineering considered okay, but not studying climbing Palmyra trees?" The answer seemed, at least to me, to revolve around the idea of dignity, what society considers to be dignified. So an engineering degree where you go to a college, wear a shirt and a trouser tucked in, etc., and sit down at a bench, gives people a sense of dignity and also perhaps mobility in the eyes of their peers. Whereas climbing Palmyra trees and studying a traditional skill set and building on that in a munda or a lungi and going topless and climbing a tree is considered less dignified. But it also creates this interesting question, right? That if we create a homogenized army of engineers, what happens to a lot of these traditional skill sets? At the same time, I'm sorry it's a long question, there's also the question of who are we to determine this? Like, if you and I sitting here say that, no, we must protect their traditional vocations and they should be able to do their skill sets, are we also consigning them to a lower position in life? And how do you navigate this very tricky terrain then?
That's a great question. Thanks. I'm glad you found this chapter fascinating, because after this chapter is when I actually figured out what this book could be about also, because education rests on this fundamental pillar that we all so deeply desire, that's of dignity. Again, I would like to contextualize this for those of you who may have not read this, but the toddy tappers, which is a derogatory term in Tamil Nadu, or the palm tree climbers in Tamil Nadu, come from a particular very oppressed caste group called the Nadars or the Shanars. What's interesting is a particular group of Nadars today have had immense social mobility. In fact, even going on to head one of the world's or India's largest IT firms, HCL, which is run by a Nadar, Shiv Nadar, right? But the same group come actually from this caste-based occupation of climbing palm trees and yerikifying kallu. Which happens in particular parts of the state, particularly in the deep south, and also in the center and near Pondicherry, Vilpuram, and all of that. What I saw when I went there, and I was there for quite a while, was that these people, the young generation, have completely abandoned the profession. Because they're like, first, we're being hounded by the cops. Because Tamil Nadu has had a very long history of spurious liquor consumption and a lot of deaths. Something as recent as 6 months where like 50 people died, very close to Chennai actually, of drinking something mixed with battery acid and stuff like that. So they're hounded by the cops non-stop, and there's a significant caste bias over there saying like, you guys are Nadas, we will beat you. Castes come from other dominant caste, cops come from other dominant castes, and so that happens. On the other hand, they all want to go to engineering college. Now, Tamil Nadu, it, to its credit, has a relatively strong school education system, free breakfast, free lunch. So ability to access schools increases. So a lot of children are of palm tree climbers have finished school. Now they're like, what do I do? Because there's not much to do. Not the neoliberal development is not too much in these parts of the. So they're like, okay, I'll go to engineering college, which is dime a dozen. There are 600 engineering colleges in Tamil Nadu, private engineering colleges in Tamil Nadu, pumping out around 2.5 lakh engineers a year. The number of jobs that are actually available within engineering, within the engineering sector is around 15,000. But there are 2.5 lakh engineers coming out every year. So they are not, and they are, this is not my judgment. They are what's they're broadly classified as unemployable because they do not have the soft skills. What are soft skills? They're basically exposure to English, communication, pop culture, all of these which are largely upper caste bastions. Again, this is how education can also be understood as broadly a Brahmin upper caste project. Uh, so they are like, we want the dignity of going to engineering college. We want that 4-year degree, like not degree padichava, like as they say in Tamil. But after finishing college, they're not able to get any jobs. And they're not able to go back to what is potentially a very, very lucrative profession. They're not able to go back to it because you need to.
Traditional.
Yeah. Again, the tradition comes from a caste occupation. So I wouldn't necessarily want to call it tradition. It's a caste occupation, caste-based occupation. They're not able to go back to the profession that their fathers, forefathers all have done. Neither are they employed. So a lot of them are actually working in Maliga Saman Kadas. It's basically your Kirana shops in Madurai and Ramanathapuram. These engineers earning as either running the shop or helping someone run the shop.
So essentially saying that the society and government and police and the existing structures have made their traditional vocation taboo and something that doesn't get any support. And you've got some numbers in your book as well. So then they fed into the engineering system, but then they become unemployable, so they can go neither here nor there.
So to paraphrase, the indignity of their caste occupation leads to a search for dignity through, in this case, engineering degrees, which then leads, they do get that dignity, which then leads to the indignity of unemployment. So basically the dignity of credentials in Tamil Nadu is leading to the indignity of unemployment. And this is a major problem. Like a serious problem, not just in Tamil Nadu, but across India. You're seeing like perhaps the largest unemployed youth population in the world, who are then clearly being recruited for a whole host of perhaps the most undesirable activities that include lynchings, protecting cow, or whatever. All of these things, it's like, what do you do when you have such a large portion of the population credentialed and unemployed? That's, yeah.
I'm going to ask you a slightly naughty question, which is that you've gone all around the country, Rajasthan, the Northeast, Tamil Nadu, etc., Kota, all of these places. Now, your position as a person going in, examining all this, being with these people, an upper caste Brahmin boy from Chennai, going into this, have you ever confronted your own, the likelihood of falling into a sort of savior complex? How do you navigate that?
100%, and that's also the reason why I didn't want to give any solution. So this is a question I get asked a lot, and it's perhaps the most important question to ask about a project like this. I have learned, so first up, when I was traveling over here, the important thing is to not take on this savior complex, like, oh, here I am, this Western educated, English speaking Brahmin man, like I'm gonna solve all of this. Like, you guys know now, any journalist, sociologist, ethnographer needs to start from a place of intellectual humility and curiosity to understand the stories, the very diverse and complex life stories of people. And when you actually engage compassionately and empathetically with people, at some point of time, they respect the fact that you're actually trying to understand. And that's where I started with. And of course, many a times, my caste location, my class location, my gender, all played significant roles, many ways in my beneficial access to these places. In some ways, like my friend, my interlocutor in Manipur who took me around a lot of places, he was like, no, you Indians are not covering anything. Like, again, I emphasize on the term, you Indians are not covering anything. At least go carry a flag for us. So you can use your I learned and I was taught in very hard ways through this journey that you can use your social location in some ways to kind of empathetically, compassionately, to be able to bring out particular stories. Definitely not to say that this is how you solve the problem, but bring out these stories. And if you do it empathetically and compassionately, I think there is a chord of resonance. Where I think there is some validation for this is that I thought I would get cancelled for this book on multiple parts of the spectrum. Interestingly, it's been received very well on either side of the spectrum. So it's like, well, okay, but it is a process. It's a process of learning and unlearning continuously of where your social location is significantly beneficial to you and oppressive to the other person. And yeah, I guess.
You've also been a teacher, and that's the other question I had when I was reading this book, which is that in many places, the infrastructure of teaching itself is flawed. You have cases where one teacher is assigned to an entire school and has to basically run all the classes, all the subjects, everything, and it's obviously done in an ad hoc, very imperfect way. But what does the teacher do? You obviously sympathize with the teacher. The teacher has no option but to make the most of what she or he gets. The other thing also is that you have cases where there are teachers registered, but they don't even live there. They come in just to draw their salary and they vanish. So there's absenteeism when it comes to the infrastructure and a lot of corruption as well. So there's that side of it also. And then, of course, the quality of teaching. Now, how does one sort of deal with something like that? And you've been a teacher, so.
This is the most complex problem in education policy. It's the most complex problem because in India, after the railways, any school education department or ministry is the largest human resource undertaking. In Tamil Nadu, you have, if I remember right, 3.5 lakh teachers and 1.5 to 2 lakh staff, right, who are paid every month. So this is a human resource undertaking of unimaginable proportions. Now, how do you control this? How do you administer equality through this? A gargantuan, literally impossible task. And I do not envy the bureaucrats who have to deal with this. Interestingly, also, in many parts of the country, especially in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, the teacher unions are extremely strong. Like I said, 2.5 lakh teachers form 2 assembly constituencies in Tamil Nadu by itself. The size of an assembly constituency in Tamil Nadu is around 2.1 to 2.3 lakh voters. So this comes to like almost 2 assembly constituencies. So they're very, very powerful. And all of these and there are multiple teacher unions, all of whom have a whole host of grievances, a whole host of desires, and 2 or 3 bureaucrats who are supposed to be their redressal mechanisms. It's impossible. Interestingly also, I'll give you Tamil Nadu because it's the state I'm most familiar with, it's where I've taught, it's where I've worked. There are around 37,000 government schools, right? Out of 37,000 government schools, 3,500 plus of them are single teacher schools from grades 1 to 8 in Tamil Nadu alone. 3,500 single teacher schools from where one teacher teaches from grade 1 to grade 8. So clearly, and it goes back to my previous point, that education, very narrowly defined, is ultimately going to be an engine for inequality. So the counter to think about it is, if like in politics, if we are discussing religion, history, caste, class, again, like I said, the only technology we have available to us which brings so many people together for so long is the school. So if we are to reimagine society, we have to reimagine schools. And if we are able to reimagine the way schools are run, we are going to be able to reimagine inequalities based on caste, class. To go back to your previous question, this is where I think at some point of time, perhaps social locations should not matter to some extent, because we need to fundamentally re-alter and reimagine the way we are thinking of school education in itself. And this is where teachers come in also, because teachers themselves occupy a whole host of social locations and social markers. And you will see Tamil Nadu, for being perhaps one of the most progressive states in terms of an anti-caste movement, has the largest amount of honor killings and the largest amount of teacher caste-based violence. Where
in the classroom, in the school.
Inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Where they outside the classroom, they'll make you go clean toilets. Inside the classroom, there's a whole documented history of a particular dominant caste group, I don't want to name them, but wearing particular wristbands so that they can be segregated inside the classrooms, mandated by the teacher or the principal. So, Yeah, so like it's a very, very hard task.
I mean, even in a progressive state, you have all of these
Yeah, yeah.
issues. Okay, I'm going to ask one final story from the book, which is the quota chapter. I found that absolutely, I mean, amusing at a certain level because most people know quota as this coaching hub. And it sort of links to the earlier question of teaching because in many ways it is because the teaching system is flawed, the education system is flawed, that kids are shepherded into these coaching classes so that they can crack entrance exams and then go on to aspire to greater things, get into an IIT, or an NIT, whatever it is. Tell us a little bit about this whole quota phenomenon because there also you mentioned that it's not easy. There's almost a caste system of institutions where the cream go to the top institutions. Within those institutions, there's what are called star batches where all the stars go to study and then the non-stars, ordinary students have to study elsewhere. Some get what are called five-star facilities to live in, and then if you don't perform, you're downgraded and potentially even kicked out of the hostel because the institution's reputation matters. It's fascinating.
So it's basically quota is a Varna system that is happening in the modern day through the lens of education. The mainstream narrative of quota is that yes, it is a coaching factory, which it is. That there's a lot of student suicides happening over there, which is happening because of excessive pressure that is being put on students to crack a very select group of entrance exams. All of this is true. The thing that's happening on top of this entire city, a city that is built for one and only reason, for teaching children, young teenagers, to crack entrance exams, is that there is a particular set of institutions. You can very easily find out what these are. These are 1,000 crore entities today, completely unregulated. They can go for an IPO.
You mentioned how many of them have campuses almost like universities.
They don't just have campuses in Kota, they have campuses across the country. Fiji being a very popular one of that. Basically, when you enter Kota for the first time or you want to join Kota, you have to write an entrance exam for that institute. Based on how you score in that entrance exam, you are sorted. Again, but going back to the Varna system, you are sorted in a particular hierarchy. Now you write exams like you have the star batch, A batch, B batch, C batch, things like that. If you don't do too well in the A batch, you're soon relegated to the B batch. If you don't do too well in the B batch, you're soon relegated to the C batch. And there's a differential amount of attention that is given for A batch, B batch, and C batch. A batch, they are the ones who are identified as these are the toppers. These guys, if we focus on, they will be able to crack it. So we will put our best resources over there. C batch, Patakla, whatever. We'll figure something will happen with them. And then the kind of hostel facilities you get depends on the marks you get also. If you score poor marks, you don't get an AC room. And this is Kota in the summer. You are brought down to a 8-bed bunk. And so, these are ways to incentivize people. Again, like I said, it's an obfuscated Varna system that's happening over there, which kind of operates within this casteless idea. But yeah, basically, that's what the chapter is about also, and how the people who derive success from it legitimize it, saying like, I did this. And this is the case of every UPSC aspirant or anybody who cracked the JEE or the NEET or any competitive entrance exam, that they will legitimize the technology that enabled their success. And therefore they'll say like, well, I did it. I put hard work. They were in the same place as me. They didn't work hard enough. And that's how this very difficult and dangerous myth of meritocracy is peddled. And that's what I bring about in that chapter as well.
You earlier briefly alluded to this whole idea of soft skills. So my final question is going to be on language, which is that how much does language affect this whole education debate? Because obviously we know English is privileged, English is aspirational. A lot of kids, or a lot of even people from lower segments of society want their kids to go to English medium schools. Even saying that my kid goes to an English medium school is a way to suggest that we moved up in life. And so, how does the language politics play out?
This is I don't have a complete answer to this question. It's something I'm researching for my PhD as well. But an important and I think a good way to understand this for now is language is basically cultural capital that you can encash, and then when you encash it, you can transfer it into other forms of capital. Now, who holds the highest amount of language capital or cultural capital? It's a particular group of upper caste people, because a lot of it, like you speak English at home, you're going to be able to speak English well at school, and then you're going to go to a school where English is prioritized, and then you go to college, and then you speak English well, and then you get jobs, you get access to Western institutions, you get access to other forms of capital. Basically, and English, the English language particularly is a tool for dignity as well. Many people, wherever I went, and I had no idea how to react to this. I'm fluent in Tamil and I'm fluent in Hindi. They would intentionally want to talk to me in English because after a long time, they're seeing someone who's conversant in English, and so they're like, okay, let me try my hand out and see where I'm at. So again, English plays a major role in dignity as well. And this is kind of what I argue in the book, and it goes back to the title of the book, The Smart and the Dumb. The politics of education in India is a politics of humiliation. It's not a politics of empowerment. And we need to really think about that. And English, again, plays a sorting role. What does education systems from an economic policy lens broadly achieves two to three things. A, it's a very good sorter. It really sorts people into particular classes, into particular hierarchies. And B, it builds human capital, skills for jobs. And the idea is that we need to look beyond these two measures. There's a whole lot more that's happening. And this needs to come democratically. This needs to come from people's aspirations. And,
So I'm going to end by asking, bringing up your own working title. At the end of the day, what's the point?
Sorry?
At the end of the day, what's the point?
Yeah, so that's where it was at. But again, like I do agree that we cannot let it be defeatist. What's the point needs to be more of a provocative question, a question that makes us think about things that we take for granted a lot. And in my experience as a teacher and having worked in education for a long time now, is one of the most common processes that's taken for granted in society is education. So, like, perhaps it's just a way to, think about some things we take for granted.
On that note, 10 minutes, audience questions, lots of hands. Oh, perfect. Someone will come with the mic.
You pick.
No, I'll have to actually ask you to pick because I have to now go into another session. So I need to leave. So you will handle the audience questions yourself.
You're leaving me alone, man.
That's all right. Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you again. Vishal will be here to answer the questions.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm an educator myself, and thank you very much for an illuminating presentation on the education system and the politics of it. My question to you is, in your research, were you able to look at how the educator, the teachers, stand with respect to their motivation, aspiration, inclination to teach?
Yeah.
They themselves being I would say wasted or tired products of a very long grind of getting into employment, putting up with a PhD in Indian University. So what kind of motivation do they bring to the table when they work as educators?
Definitely, I mean, very important question and a very valid critique. I think I made an intentional choice to not put this voice out there because this is way too diverse to sort of encapsulate. I think by highlighting a particular set of teachers in a particular set of places, I would be doing the injustice of leaving out a whole host. So I had to make the difficult decision this is a very complex, broad topic, kind of as a writer, I just had to make the difficult decision of leaving this out. I did try, and I had no idea how to treat the topic. So I think it's just a lot better to maybe not write it if you don't know how to deal with it, I suppose, yeah.
Hello. My question is isn't unemployment and underemployment, aren't they blunders of the state and the central government? And in regards to that, if we question the benefits of education, isn't that absolutely cruel and isn't it diluting the concept of reservation itself?
No, not at all. Thanks for that question. I don't think it's cruel to question the benefits of education. I think it's important to question who benefits from education, who particularly corners the benefits of education. Like I said, like I started this talk out and I start my book out saying, yes, there are enormous benefits to education. But who's cornering those benefits is the important question we take for granted. Again, this goes back to a very broad, a very complex word, education, which is, you all have different interpretations and meanings of it. And I suppose that's where you're coming from and that's where I'm coming from as well. So perhaps an easier thing to measure, an easier thing to tangibly look at and kind of discuss as a society is who benefits from it. It's not cruel to think of what are the benefits of education. There are plenty, but who benefits from it is a very important point, I feel. Yes, to the gentleman in the hat. I mean, he's been asking for a while. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Colonel Nisar. I am the director of SAFI Group of Institutions. So, firstly, it was a wonderful insight and it was very exhaustive to our educational system. Well done, very well done. In such a short span of time, tremendous. My first question is you already mentioned that by saying literacy rate at person 95 or 90, there is a huge gap between academia and the industry. I'm not talking about only technical, I'm talking about even the science graduates, your humanity graduates, or your commerce, whatever you take. So, how do you bridge this existing huge gap? That was my first question.
Okay.
Second question, you talked about the NEP 2020. We are into the fifth year now, but nowhere, because the center and the states are fighting. So there is no, final decision where to go, how to go. And at the lower level, now we have started the 4-year program, kind courtesy Kerala government this year.
Yeah. So we have
Academic
4
year.
minutes left, so if you could
Yeah.
just like wrap.
There's the second, whereas the school side, nothing has happened.
I agree. So simple, I'll answer your second question first. Instead of again, this is me canvassing this on stage, but instead of a national education policy, I would much rather each state build its own state education policy and seriously and rigorously implement that. And that's the idea of a cooperative federal government that we run under. The national education policy is perhaps never going to work. It's not going to work. To your first question on the academia industry bridge, I think the most serious thing is that higher education is asked to take on the burdens of the failing of the school education sector. This is where, and this is, I think, at the heart of the problem. One way, again, I can only answer broadly because, again, it varies context to context. One of the things that we were working on at the Department of School Education also is to involve every higher education institution that is present in the state to work closely with the schools surrounding it. This happens actually everywhere in the world, in the developed world. For example, Harvard, where I did my master's at, Harvard may be a global university, but fundamentally it works for the community of Cambridge, Massachusetts. It empowers those schools over there. The people who went to the Graduate School of Education fundamentally go to the schools over there. That's not happening over here. So if higher education institutions can seriously engage with schools in and around, 5 schools in and around wherever a particular college is, I think you're going to be able to see that gap bridge a lot more. It's not going to come from the industry. The industry doesn't have the time or the incentives to run full-fledged training programs. So I suppose that's one way to go about it. Thank you. We can discuss it later. Yeah, thanks.
Good evening. My wife was a high school teacher in a government-aided school. So she has to tackle 3. One is government rules, then management rules, then the actual kids who are learning with her. She knows their family condition and everything. So how should she effectively change the, how should she effectively change the, how can she contribute to change?
So I think you are a lot more qualified to answer that question than I am. You have a lot more experience than I do. I don't know. I think teaching is a very inherent.
Now she's retired.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very difficult question for me to answer. I think it's, I suppose, I don't know. The job of a teacher is a very, like, the teacher plays the role of a parent.
There were 70 students in the class.
Yeah. I mean, that's why there's,
How do you attend?
no, there is policy mandate saying that pupil-teacher ratios or student-teacher
Yeah.
ratios should be 20 to 25:1. But it's very difficult to implement, let's say, in a single-teacher school where, like, you have perhaps 60 kids from class 1 to 8. So it's
Right.
going to be difficult, which is where I think instead of the state, this is something I had worked with the DMK. And in one of the discussions on education being a part of the of the elections, why there are so many cadres. The DMK and the ADMK in Tamil Nadu are some of the largest cadre-based parties in the country, and perhaps in the world also. These cadres do a lot of things. They can spend a few hours a week in the school,
I'm,
and with the families helping these kids learn. And that's like community-based learning is perhaps important to supplement teachers as well.
I was talking about a school in Mumbai.
Yeah. So I'm giving you an example. So why not, like, the political parties in Mumbai can involve themselves as a community, and the party can work for the community of education rather than the community of their social location. It's perhaps one. That's all I can answer that
There
question.
are 2 more questions.
No, sir. We have one. We have 1 minute left, so I'll take one more question.
minutes.
We can discuss this after.
Coaching centers cannot be banned.
Definitely, I think so too. But yeah.
So to add with earlier Manu said about the quota incident,
About?
the quota factory and all. So what we have is like the increasing suicide rates in this country about the students and all. What does quota? I saw something on social media like earlier. What they came with a creative solution. Students used to hang and die in fans. So they put a net to not hang. So that is the creative solution that they came with. So where do you think? Who do you think must give the solution? That means should it be the students, or should it be the education system, or should it be the parents? Where should it start from?
I think it comes from the community of like a student is a student or a parent or a teacher or an education system is not separate from the rest of society. Schools don't exist or education systems don't exist in a vacuum. We are all like, I go to school 8 hours a day. After that, 16 hours a day I spend somewhere else. Then that community plays a much bigger role in my life, as much as a role in my life as the school does. So these solutions need to come from the community as such. Like, yeah, like your example is just like where the community doesn't engage seriously. It's just stopgap solutions, which doesn't work. Thanks. Let's take one last question. It's difficult. Any women? Yes, please. Yeah, thanks. Too many men asking questions.
Hello. My question to you is I really like what you said when you said the 10% of the problem is just the access to education, right? 90% of the issue is what we learn when we get that access. And that is where I would think the flaw of the education system lies in, because it depends on what you're really teaching the children, and that's how their brains are going to function after that.
I would add on to that by saying also how we learn.
Sorry?
How we learn.
Yeah, I mean, but how we learn is something that we learn in school, right? And over the years, I think our brain sort of ends up functioning in the way that we are taught and what things we're exposed to.
Definitely.
So I would say, like, my question really is, how could we, like, make active change to what we are learning, make it like unschooling or something like that, wherein we kind of better what we are learning instead of learning as a whole?
I think the internet is providing us phenomenal solutions for that. I'm sorry, we're completely out of time in the next speaker's thing, but yeah, I think the internet provides a great role and it's democratizing learning a lot more through multiple pedagogies. So it's something I think anybody today should be able to invest in. Yes, thank you so much for your engagement and for your questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you.